All right, here we go. All right, thanks, Trisha. All right, as I said originally, welcome to our session. My name is Tracy Lipicki. I am the director of the Aspire Professional Development Network team at Ohio State. Our PDN team is part of the Center on Education and Training for Employment at Ohio State. And like many of you, I have multiple roles. I'm also for the center, the Associate Director of Operations and Strategic Initiatives. And just this month, I'm starting my 20th year in Ohio Aspire. And yeah, thanks. It's been an amazing experience to be part of this community for this long. And as we continue to change and grow, I'm looking forward to all the next adventures that we're going to have. So that's just a really quick little intro for myself. I'm going to turn the mic to Trisha and ask her to introduce herself, and then we'll get going.
Good morning, and thanks for joining us. My name is Trisha Hughes Fitzgerald, and I work at the Center on Education and Training for Employment. And at the center, I have the opportunity to serve on a couple of different teams, and one of those teams is the Ohio Aspire Professional Development Network, which provides training resources and support for our Ohio Aspire teachers, program directors, and staff. I've been on the program with the program for, 6 or 7 years since I came to Ohio State, and then about 2 years before that when I was at Sinclair. So I'm excited to be with you guys this morning, and thanks for joining us.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Beth Crawford, and I also work at the Center for Education and Training for Employment. And I am into my 13th year. I had been a part of the PDN. I still am part of the curriculum and assessment for training at the center, as well as a few other teams. I primarily do project management, but a variety of other things. And today we're just going to be talking about some of the changes that we've had to make and some of the opportunities that I've been able to participate in, which has been a really exciting time for me. So I'm really looking forward to having this conversation with you today. And we'll get started. Tracy, I do want to mention, I don't think I have control over this, but I'm understanding that the chat is disabled. So we may need to go in and make sure that our chat is enabled. We do want folks to interact with us via chat, so we will get that straightened around here.
Yes, I saw that note too, Beth. I'm not quite sure how to do that. Beth, can you promote Alicia, and maybe Alicia can help us with that on the side if we promote her to a host as well? Trisha, can we move on to the next slide? Okay. So I want to take you back in time. Sometimes this feels like a really long time ago. Sometimes it feels like yesterday. But let's go back to the spring. And I suspect at that time, maybe you were teaching a class or thinking about what your end of year activities were going to be as you're administering your program, maybe planning for graduation, or even thinking about the summer and what kind of trips that you might be taking or what some of those summer plans might be. And then, Trisha, the pandemic hit and everything changed. Next slide, please. We were all in that moment confronted, with economic uncertainty, racial inequities, all of that in the midst of healthcare crisis. And, from then, even until now, we're all living sort of with some sense of trauma from that experience. The current pandemic has surged across our landscape, and I would say it's revealed underlying problems or issues across a variety of our systems. How we educate and learn, to where and how we work, impacting the economy, how we care for one another, what our care industry looks like, and where we stand with racial equity, diversity, and inclusion. Next slide, please. So how do we make sense of that? How do you make sense of that inside of your own organization? So what we're going to look at today in this conversation is the items that are on the screen here. We're going to discuss organizational culture, identify the elements of that, of what contributes, what does a healthy culture look like, and explore ways that leadership can positively impact culture. As we go through these slides, please reflect on your experience and think about what strategies you have used or you might be using as you navigate this space yourself within your organization for your team, for your Aspire program. Next slide, please. So here's my first question for you. What does organizational culture look like to you? And Beth, do we know if the chat's back up?
I don't think so. I am not a co-host, so I can't promote anyone. I would suggest maybe we could just have folks unmute if they are able to, and talk about what organizational culture looks like to you.
Perfect. Anyone have any thoughts they'd like to share first? What are some descriptors that come to mind when you think of the concept of organizational culture?
I would say transparency.
Okay. Anyone else?
I would say collaborative.
Collaboration.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. Any other thoughts?
Good communication.
Communication.
I would like to add innovative.
Okay, innovative. Wonderful. Okay. So I love those words: collaboration, transparency, good communication, innovative. What I'm going to share with you is the idea that really there is no one specific definition of organizational culture, that it sometimes becomes one of those sort of we know it when we see it kind of idea. And there are a variety of ways to think about culture. In particular, I would say that when we think about culture, we come up with, these kinds of words: innovation. Think about what it is that you like about where you work, maybe as a way of thinking about it. So ideas like, oh, it's a fun place to work, or it's student-centered or student-focused, or family-driven, or innovative. All of these words are used to we describe culture in a variety of ways, and part of that comes out of we don't have one single uniform definition of what is organizational culture. But what I would share with you is that culture really does have to do with what our shared values are and what behaviors are acceptable in a particular work environment. And you might even think about a culture inside of a culture. The concept that maybe your school district or your organization has presents itself in one way. You have maybe a set of principles or values that you've published, and you say, this is what we're about. But maybe within your Aspire program, inside of that district or inside of that organization, how that plays out or what that looks like maybe shifts around a little bit because of some other aspect of how you think about the services that you provide in your program. The other thing I would share, and I'll have handouts for you. We'll get those to you after the event, or put them in the documents for the conference. The Society for Human Resources Management which is an organization focused on human resources and have a pretty large network. They've shared a variety of items that impact culture. One of those is the degree of the hierarchy in your organization. So if you have a pretty formal or structured hierarchy where there are, definitive policies and rules that everyone has to follow, and procedures that are pretty rigid or very structured. That's what a high hierarchy would look like. And you could think of maybe military as an example where there are specific procedures that you follow. In some healthcare settings, you can think of that in that same way, that there are a very hierarchical, if you will, structure. A moderate hierarchy would be where there's a formal process in place, but there is an opportunity to sort of go around that or to make exceptions to that at points in time. So think of if your organization is such that you might be able to go, your boss's boss has an open door and you can go and have a conversation with that person without having to maybe go through your direct supervisor first. The third element of, or the third idea of relative to hierarchy is a low hierarchy. So here it's where maybe job descriptions are loosely defined, there is not as much structure in place, and maybe even challenging authority is a regular part of how that particular organization functions. So you might think of maybe a computer startup or a technology startup where everyone is sort of in it together collectively, and they're just sort of all kind of pitching in and coming up with the product or the service that they're providing. And so they all kind of take on whatever role needs to happen at any particular point in time. So I would suggest that, the other element of this to consider is what is the functional orientation within your organization. Again, going back to the Society for Human Resources Management, they've suggested that what is your particular function, what function gets emphasized the most, also helps to color how you think about what your actual culture is. So I would just say, as an example, with our center really, we emphasize learning. Learning is a function within our center. You might even say we're in the business of learning. And so as such, we then promote learning within all of the staff members that work in our center, investing in their own professional development, so that then they take that and reinvest that learning that they've had back into what we consider ourselves to be as a learning organization. So those are just some things to keep in mind, some frames of reference to think about culture relative to what are your shared values and beliefs, how structured or loosely structured is your organization, what are the primary functions that you're trying to accomplish within that organization. These are the elements that are things I want you to keep in mind as we start talking about some specifics. Next, Beth is going to take the mic and talk about what some of these elements of healthy culture have looked like or are looking like within our center. Beth?
Thank you, Tracy. So,
And Beth, can I just
yes,
interrupt for just a second?
absolutely.
So we have some technical assistants working behind the scenes, and according to our Zoom guru, Tracy, since you're the host, you should be able to turn the chat on. Alicia just texted me that and said, since you're the host, you can open up the chat. For more information, text Alicia. Take it over, Beth.
Well, these are our realities. So this is where we're at today. We are on screens trying to figure out technology and trying to figure out different ways to communicate with one another. So this couldn't have come at a more, opportune time for us to really show the examples of some of the challenges. But I really want to focus on, some of the positives, or the silver lining, as I like to call it, that's come out of the pandemic in this time for our organization. So a couple of years ago, just to give you some context, we went through a pretty major leadership changeover. And prior to that leadership changeover, we were an organization where I would categorize as, functioning very well, but functioning primarily within siloed teams. We didn't have a lot of cross collaboration. We didn't necessarily meet as an all staff and have conversations and strategic planning. And when that leadership changed over, we did start meeting. We started meeting on a quarterly basis, face to face. Our teams started figuring out ways to collaborate. We have people who work full time in the building, and then we have folks like Trisha who works remotely and travels in to the center now and again when she has face-to-face things. So we've always had kind of this hybrid model. So we have figured out how to, phone those staff in when we're having staff meetings. But primarily everyone was on site, and we would have maybe one or two people on a phone call or a call. So from the moment the building closed and yay, the chat is working, hooray for technical assistance. But from the moment our building closed and working from home was implemented, our leadership and our change in leadership really focused on regular communication with associates. So, keep in mind that context of we were meeting, quarterly. We now have regular check-ins with associates every week, every Monday in the afternoon. These are not required meetings. But while getting the work done and figuring out how to quickly revamp our products and services is important, first and foremost for our leadership was checking in and checking up on people. That's what took priority. I remember that first check-in, and people were emotional. People were afraid. People were not certain, what the future held. Most of us had children at home in a variety of different stages, trying to figure out how we continue their online learning. None of us signed up to be homeschool parents. We're all working parents, so trying to figure out that balance. And it was so critically important that our leadership said, we're not even talking about work and productivity right now. I want to know how you are doing. And that was incredibly important to build that trust. And we continue those conversations. They asked, what do you want these meetings to look like? Most people said, we want them to be a combination. We want to know the updates, what's going on with the university, what's going on with the center, what are the parameters about coming back into the office. But we also want them to be an opportunity for us just to connect with one another. It's hard being at home and being, somewhat isolated and not having those hallway conversations. So that's what we have started doing. So we have weekly updates, and then Tracy follows that up with email correspondence with any appropriate links to what's going on, if there's any required trainings, or we had our performance management reviews during this time. So how to get those done. We have budget updates and HR updates. And then we have time just to share. We've had breakout rooms talking about gardening, talking about what we're all cooking during COVID, talking about balancing online learning with working, and pet care. A lot of us have pets, a lot of us shared pets. So that's been really, it's been kind of amazing, because these are conversations that we wouldn't normally have, because when we're in the office, it's just kind of head down, you're working within your team, it's about productivity and getting those things done. but this has been an opportunity for us to share kind of across teams and think about some different innovation. We've also been able to implement some professional development during that time. So about once a month, we have some sort of professional development we call CETE Learn. And we bring in different people, different speakers, and that's a time for us to all kind of learn and grow. And I have to say, you know, these are not required meetings. We have probably, you know, I don't have the percentages that I'm a data person, but, you know, I would say well over 90% of our staff are participating. And if they're not participating, it's because they have a conflict or they have an appointment or something like that. I think that if it worked out, we would probably have 100% participation. So, you know, for you all, you would need to consider kind of what kind of technology you have. We do find that having cameras on is helpful, talking in real time, you know, seeing people's expressions, seeing people's backgrounds. I always love seeing Trisha and her boys, you know, they're over there trying to do online learning, and you'll see them dart in and out, or, you know, it's just, it's a way for us to all experience what we are. This is reality. This is what we're all dealing with. We're all balancing many of these things. So that's fun. Tracy always has, you know, some great backgrounds of, you know, pictures she's taken on her weekend hikes. And she usually always has a great story about what kind of background she's putting up. So that's always fun to see. So what we've realized is that the pandemic has opened up some of these new connections, that you don't have to be face to face to network. And it's been so foundational to many of the other things that we've been able to accomplish. And you'll hear about some of the additional innovations and things that and productivity that we've been able to accomplish through this pandemic, which has been fantastic. We also share a lot of different tips and tricks to navigate the pandemic. We use Microsoft Teams. That's our like hallway check-in, different software, different, I know at the beginning it was all about desk and how we're setting up our offices at home. And we were able to share a lot of tips and tricks about that. Next slide, please. Oh, you've already got me up. Community building is another, you know, huge, important element when you're talking about organizational culture. In pre-pandemic, I really wanted to start a book club at work. I always thought it would be fun. I'd never participated in a book club. I thought it would be a way for us to share some different things and participate in professional development in a different way. But you know what happens? A million things get in the way. There's a million reasons why you don't. You try to figure out, well, you know, how are we going to find a meeting time that's going to work for everybody? Everyone's schedule's different. So the pandemic really offered us a way. I just said, you know what, let's start a virtual book club. And we did that, and it's been a huge success. And, you know, we, with an eye towards our, you know, learning organization, we read and we learn from each other's perspective. We are building that community, and we're learning together, but in a really different way, and having these enriched conversations that I don't think would have naturally happened had we all been in the office. And again, keeping in that hybrid model. Like, I don't know how Trisha would have necessarily participated being the one-off on a phone call when the rest of us are in the room, because the connections are really different. Now we're all in the same virtual space. So that's been really, really fun to participate with. And I have loved facilitating and, you know, picking out our next books. We read a book probably about every 6 weeks. It's very casual. And we read and we discuss, and it's been, like I said, a great success. We've also, a couple of other examples of community building during this, this new time is that we've always had a face-to-face tailgate every September, football kickoff. We've always had a tailgate to kind of kick off the fall and again, have that face-to-face community building where a lot of people, you know, some people would say, oh, I'm just going to stay up in my office and work because I've got too much going on. This year we did a virtual tailgate, huge success. We're planning a virtual holiday party. And most recently, we hosted a virtual open house, which featured some of our innovation. So we were able to talk about some of the innovation and some of the things that we've been able to do during this pandemic, as well as on the fun side and showing us as a community a virtual costume contest. And we also then at the end gave out a virtual swag bag. So I have to give huge props to our leadership of putting together what I think was a huge success, as well as just incredibly creative. We want people to be able to connect with us, but we can't have them in our building. So what is a way that we can pivot what we're doing? And the dean of the college came and stayed with us for the whole time, including through the costume contest, which you can see a picture here in the presentation, as well as a picture of a few of us participating in our book club. So, all right, next slide. I talked about, you know, communication and community building, really laying the foundation, building that trust and connection with one another. Tracy mentioned in the beginning, you know, during this unprecedented time, along with the pandemic, we also then witnessed the killing of George Floyd and so many other racial injustices. It shook our team to the core, as I'm sure it did, you know, many others. And we had some really difficult conversations as we tried to process through all of that, and really determined very quickly that we, as a learning organization, as a translational research center, we wanted to be in this space and we wanted to take action. And because of all of the work that we had been doing, we were positioned and ready to tackle institutional racism that plagues our society. We are so thankful to the leadership. We began hosting, as I said, the CETE Learns, a lot of those focused on institutional racism and racial injustices. We also formed the Racial Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Steering Team, which you'll see there, we call READY. Tricia and I both serve on the steering committee, as well as many of others from the center. And of course, Tracy is part of the leadership team, really spearheading this initiative. Our vision is to make racial equity a day-to-day priority, resulting in settings that are inclusive, safe, and welcoming, and where white privilege is acknowledged and has no negative influence on how individuals of color fare. READY encompasses different levels of action. We are working on developing plans around interpersonal work, institutional, and societal work. Each level has a specific set of activities that associates engage with, and we're starting at the interpersonal level. And we hope to be implementing some of our work starting in January. Some of the activities include professional development that I mentioned, workshops, white affinity and multiracial reflection groups, a corporate responsibility project that we hope to launch, and again, a steering team responsible for ongoing development and management of READY. We have been incredibly grateful for leadership recognizing the need for racial equality in our center, as well as then our sphere of influence, that we are working with so many unique projects that interface with teachers like yourself, skilled trades workers, creating assessments for end of course assessments that can be to make sure that we are diverse and representing populations in an appropriate way. So we have huge reach and a huge opportunity to really make some impacts in that area. And I'm so certain that our ability to engage in such difficult conversations and being able to be vulnerable with our colleagues is a direct result of the trust that has been built through the various communication and community building activities that I highlighted. I don't want to say that we would have not done this work pre-pandemic, but I think it would have looked differently. And I really believe that in my heart. And I just can't say enough that for me personally, this has been one of the most impactful and meaningful pieces of work that I've ever been engaged in. And I've been in social services for well over 20 years, even though I'm only 35. Wink, wink. So that takes me to the end of my portion, talking about communication, community building, and one of the important initiatives that we're involved in. I'm going to turn it over to Tricia to talk a little bit about coaching.
So before we dive into coaching, I just wanted to say a couple of things. Shocking. Tracy mentioned new leadership in our center, and under this new leadership, 2 years ago, I think it was about 2 years ago, our new leader, our new director, Anna Paulus, talked about one seat. And for a long time, we were kind of siloed on our different projects, and we kind of stayed in our teams. And we always wanted to combine, to come together, but we could never quite do it. And we'd have meetings and we'd talk about it. And, oh yeah, let's work across teams. It's going to happen. But we could never quite get there. And Anna Paula came in and talked about one seat. And I was like, oh, that's really good. We should get t-shirts because I'm a t-shirt girl. But we didn't. But it really wasn't until the pandemic hit that I really feel like we became part of one seat. If you can hear my kids behind me, it's chaos, and I'm very sorry. It really wasn't until the pandemic hit that I felt like we really became one seat, because now, like what Beth said, you couldn't stay up in your office and miss the tailgate. The tailgate was on your computer. You couldn't stay up in your office and not come to our open house. The open house was on your computer. So we came together. It's easier to attend things virtual. I thought it would be impossible to do things virtual. Y'all know me, I do the training, I do NTO for our new Aspire teachers. And I was like, oh my Lord, I don't know if I can do this. I'll tell you what, Aspire programs out there, your teacher attendance, we're seeing teachers that didn't take NTO when they were supposed to. It's okay, don't worry about it, because they're coming out now and they're taking it. And maybe they couldn't take it because they didn't want to drive to Cleveland. I get that. Or maybe they didn't want to spend 5 hours in a professional development. I get that. We reconfigured our new teacher orientation, and now our attendance is great. And I have your teachers saying, I couldn't come, or it was just way too much to ask, but you know what? I can do 2.5 hours on a Friday. So even though we're at a distance, we're building a community, and people are participating in ways that I never imagined. And also, and just to harken back to this communication and community building, it did allow us to build a trust among our staff that allowed us to dive into this racial equity, diversity, and inclusion work. I don't know if we ever would have done that. Yeah, we can do hard things. So even though in the middle of a pandemic, had somebody told me back in March that our center would be thriving, I would have thought, you are batty. You are totally wrong. But I feel like we are more cohesive now. We're more joined now. We know each other better now. And so this emphasis on communication in Teams, communication in Zoom, communication in email. Sometimes it can be a little much because you got messages coming from everywhere, but we're talking. So this emphasis on communication has really helped. And the emphasis on community building. It sounds so simple. Some of you may be sitting there thinking, well, duh, of course, community building. Yeah, I got you. but dive in, reimagine how you can do this in a virtual setting. And I hope it works for you as well as it has worked for us. And what I'm going to talk about is coaching. So I'm also going to take a drink of my water, and apparently if I don't mute, you can hear me. If you know me, you know I'm a thirsty person. All right. Just because we're in a virtual environment doesn't mean that we have to stop training our employees, right? And developing them and taking them down the road to getting better. So regardless of environment, face-to-face or virtual, coaching is an essential part of any learning organization. So at CETE, we do a lot of coaching. The qualities needed to be a coach remain the same regardless of environment. You got to have people that are willing to change, have a high level of initiative, and have a personal and organizational commitment to the workplace. If you have that, you're 75% of the way there. They also need to trust the person taking them down that road, that coaching road. And if that's you, then they need to trust you. And we've already talked about how communication and community building have developed this intense amount of trust in our staff. And I just want to talk a little bit about how you can do that by giving you an example of what I've done. In my work at CETE, I was involved in a project where I was asked to train skilled technicians in the coaching process so that they could successfully serve as coaches for either new people, new technicians in their field, or for technicians that needed to upskill. Maybe they assessed deficiency in a skill and they needed to work with somebody to get up to par. So we worked with these skilled technicians and we coached them to become coaches. The coaches I trained, they had that willingness to learn. They had that initiative and they were personally and organizationally committed to CETE, or not to CETE, but to Ohio State. There's kids. Can you close the door? Thanks. Candy? Sure. Oh, are those, just go. Cheese balls, go. Love Halloween, good times. So how do you build a coach, and how do you build a trusting relationship? To be a coach, I needed subject matter expertise in the area that I was going to be working with my coachees in. And you know, from my work in Aspire, that I have that. I mean, I tend to be a trainer. So I had that subject matter expertise in adult education. And so I used my subject matter expertise to train my coachees in explicit instruction. So that was the model they were going to use with their candidates. And the three essential components of explicit instruction: modeling, thinking aloud, and providing feedback. These were going to be things that my coaches would be expected to do as coaches of their coachees. We also gave them multiple rounds of practice. Yeah, we have candy. Yes, you may have candy. This is going great. Thank you. This is excellent. We also provided them with multiple rounds of practice that included timely and actionable feedback. And the fact that I had the required content knowledge, I think that laid the foundation that these coaching candidates came in like, okay, she knows what she's talking about. So that's kind of the first step into establishing this trusting relationship. But in order to continue and sustain this trusting relationship, I needed to maintain a connection with my coaching candidates. And we did that by scheduling monthly meetings, communities of practice. Every community of practice started with reminding the coaching candidates of what and why. So what was the goal of the program and why their participation was essential. Next came facilitated discussion. Jack, can you close my door? This is great. Next came facilitated discussion, where the coaching candidates discussed what was working and, quite brutally, what was not working. And during this discussion, I made sure that I wrote down their concerns in a parking lot. I got their feedback, which sometimes it was rough, but we were a community practice. We were establishing a relationship. We were building a trusting relationship. So I did the parking lot, face-to-face feedback, always gave them a way to provide anonymous feedback too. After every community of practice, an immediate email. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much for participating in this program. Here's what we did in our meeting. And I assured them that I would find answers to their questions, that their issues would be addressed, and that their feedback would be acted upon. The next time we came together, I reminded them of the what and the why, and then I launched into here's what we've learned so far. So in that give and take, they gave me valuable feedback. I found the answers that I needed for them, and I came back and I said, you're important, here are the answers. And based on your feedback, we've made a couple changes to the program. So not just you're important, here are your answers, but we're changing based on what you said. And that built a really good relationship between us. So in the end, while my subject matter expertise was important, it wasn't the most important. It was the routine we provided, the willingness to listen and collect feedback from the coaching candidates and act upon that feedback to make program enhancements that were the strongest supports for establishing a trusting relationship. So what's the magic? To leading from over here and providing support to your people, communication and community building, and coaching. Your people are still worth it, even in a virtual environment. You can do it. Yeah, so enjoy my children. They will probably not talk to me for the rest of the day, just so there's that. All right, next slide. There you go.
All right, so we're back to me. So I would say another element of a healthy culture is being flexible and adaptable and maybe not taking yourself too seriously, right? As we've sort of threaded through this conversation, sort of life happens. Life could be Tracy can't get the chat to work. Life could be the kids are in the background, a whole host of things. So that flexibility, adaptability, and sort of what we'll get to at the very end is sort of just meeting people where they are. So on this slide, I have the question, what does leadership look like to you? So this is another opportunity if you want to put some elements in the chat of just descriptor words, maybe something that we've talked about so far or something that is important to you about leadership. Because like organizational culture, there are lots of ways to think about leadership and lots of ways to build leadership skills. Anything that you want to share that you would say is what leadership looks like to you? Either in the chat or if you want to unmute, you can do that as well. Being a good communicator. I see that in the chat. Yes, thank you for that. Connecting. Hopefully some of these ideas kind of repeat some of the things that we've already said. One of the complexities for us with thinking about what we wanted to say today was that it's sort of hard to separate the concept of culture and the concept of leadership. That if it's working well, those are all very much connected. And even if it's not working well, if it's a toxic environment, those unfortunately can be connected. So some of the other things I see in the chat, I see supporting staff, being supportive, being genuine, flexible, positive. Yes, these are great. Teaching in a way that you would like to learn, right? So I want to switch just a little bit and talk about a couple of ideas, and some of them I think are being repeated in the chat, so that's great. So on the next slide, I have a couple of images, and many times when you ask people what does leadership look like, one of the first items that comes up is having vision. That the image in the middle of this picture here or the slide is, you know, sort of looking out into the landscape, looking through the binoculars to see what's out there. And vision is certainly important. Vision can help give us a point on the horizon that we're going to aim towards or an outcome that we want to get to. But as people are putting in the chat, I would also suggest that there are other aspects of leadership that are just as important. And one of them, which I think is in the chat, is this idea of holding. And I didn't know the word holding until I started to look into this topic. It comes out of some of the psychology literature, and it basically is the idea of leaders have to be strategic. A leader isn't completely transparent. meaning that a leader has to be thoughtful about what is shared with staff and what is sort of held back. And even can be the idea in my mind, holding also goes to the idea of being supported and almost sort of like holding onto your staff and giving them the support that they need, particularly now when we're in this time of crisis. So the image on the left of the group that's rowing, you have the person in the back of the boat who is sort of seeing ahead and is giving direction. And then you have the folks who are pulling the oars. The people pulling the oars don't need to know exactly everything that's outside of that's behind them. They just need to trust in the person who's giving them the directions to pull the oars, or to angle how they pull the oars. So the idea of being strategic, being thoughtful, and um, being careful and deliberate about what you share, how you share it, when you share it, is important. And as Beth mentioned, and Trisha did as well, for us at our center, part of our journey was meeting people where they are. And so meeting them where they are might mean that you need to answer some of those tough questions, or it might mean, you know, saying, I don't have the answer, but we'll figure it out together, or giving space to balance between being productive and you know, getting yourself organized in order to teach your class or to work with your students, and realizing that when people come into their workplace, the whole person comes into that workplace. And so certainly we don't want to bring our bad days with us when we're getting ready to do our work, but it's a reality. It's a part of uh, our experiences. So how can we be authentic? Well, being authentic, circling back to what Trisha was saying about coaching and being supportive and I see encouraging, open to new ideas, being connected to your the people you're working with, being connected to your staff. The third image on the slide is just that, a group of people. Can't really tell who's in charge in that picture because they're all in it together. And that notion of being all in it together might sound kind of, sometimes to me, it feels like that's becoming sort of a cliche topic. We're all in it together, because the reality is we're not all having the same experience. There are a variety of experiences, positive and negative, and tragic and uplifting, that are happening at this time, but we are all experiencing this time at the same time. So there is some commonality in our experience. So how can we build trust? And part of that is meeting people where they are and being that coach or that support and building that trust to create an environment that is both productive and positive. It's a little bit hard right now sometimes to be positive. So how can you work the best that you can with the staff or the folks that you work with? And that has to do with being very thoughtful about everything that folks are bringing with them when they come in to do their work at any point in this environment. I'm going to shift, Trisha, to the next slide. Just to get the takeaways up, and then we can, I really do want to open the mics and just sort of see what else is on your minds relative to this topic. I want to kind of thread things together a little bit. So starting at the beginning with what are some elements of a healthy culture, and what does healthy culture look like? And thinking about, what does your hierarchy look like? How formal or informal is your structure? And maybe is it a time to revisit some of that formality within your structure? Because things that work when we're actually be able to be together face to face may not work right now. Thinking about within your organizational culture, are you, what kind of functions do you want to be known for? What are the descriptors that you want? If someone says, describe your culture, what are the 5 words that you would use to say, this is what my culture is all about? For us at CETE, right now, our culture is about being innovative, about sort of just leaning into the things that are sort of uncomfortable and figuring out new ways to do what we do. It's about learning and growing along the way, and, you know, really modeling and sort of working the way that we want our work to be. So acknowledging and honoring that we're in unusual times. I think that's the first and foremost important thing that we all need to do at this point, acknowledging the circumstances. We need to meet people where they are. Recognizing that a whole person comes into that workspace, or a whole student, as you all know, whole students come in and they bring their lives with them. How do we meet people where they are so that we're acknowledging that this is the circumstances that we're in at this point in time, and then taking the time to connect. And that's also, I think, one of the takeaways and items that folks have put into the chat. It's critical at this time to connect with each other. Slow down a little bit, devote some time to the community within your program, the community within your staff, the community that you create with your students, and your larger community. How can this be a reflective time? And as Beth said, looking for those silver linings. What are the silver linings and the happy accidents that can happen out of this environment? All of those, I think, are relevant and thread through the ideas of culture and leadership. That, as in the original chat, folks mentioned collaboration as an item relative to culture, and being transparent, being clear where you can be about what's going on. Obviously, communication and innovation was another item that was mentioned. All of these words are words to consider when you think about how you want to position your Aspire program, or your district, your institution in the time that we're in now. We have a few minutes left, so I just want to open up for questions or conversation. We really would like to know, how are you navigating this space? What are you feeling have been successes, small wins, if you will, at this time, versus items that really are still a challenge, either in your leadership or in the way your program is organized, how you're working with your students. Anyone have thoughts that they'd like to share or comments? If not, that's okay as well. We have kind of talked about a lot of different items here. Hopefully there's some threads in what we've said that resonate with you. If you're interested in the list of the books that we've been reading with our book club, I'm sure Beth would be happy to share those. And there are opportunities to connect into book clubs through the PDN, and many of you, I'm sure, have done some book studies within your programs, incorporating professional development into your staff meetings. I know that has been part of the fabric of Aspire too. So some of these items, I'm hoping, resonate with you and have been things that you've been already doing, and so maybe moving them into a different format has maybe not been as challenging, and that's okay. All right, Trisha, I think we'll go ahead and do the last slide and just do a little wrap up items here. So here's our contact information, and I am going to, if I can talk and click at the same time, I am going to upload into the chat for your download, if you want, both a copy of our presentation and a handout. Hopefully they're both there. If there's any problems with either of those, feel free to reach out to me if you want those materials. The handout, what I've put in there are some of the references that we used when we thought about this topic and what we wanted to put into the presentation. And then also some links to some other sources, like Harvard Business Review, as an example, provides quick reads, little short articles, and nice, thoughtful items that you can even get as an email delivered to your inbox. In addition, Ohio Aspires doing a leadership series for administrators this year. So that might be another resource that you want to plug into, in addition to other trainings and resources that are available through the PDN. I would close with, I think the other thing that I need to mention is to make sure that you complete your survey for the session in the the app for the conference so that you can provide feedback to us and to the conference organizers about this session and the other sessions that you might participate throughout the day in the coming Fridays. And I see Beth has put in the chat some of the titles that we've been reading, and there are many others too. So I think we're close to the end. Again, if anyone would like to ask any questions or have any conversations with Beth or Trisha and I, we are here until the room closes. So we're happy to continue the conversation or clarify anything that we've shared in the session.
We'll hang out.
Any final thoughts, Beth or Trisha? Anything you want to share?
I don't think so. Just we are here. So if anybody has any questions or want to have any conversations about anything we shared, that would be great.
All right. Thank you, everyone. I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you.